Earlier this week, the Supreme Court announced it would hear two cases challenging the legality of race-based affirmative action in college admissions. As commentators have noted, because conservatives now have a supermajority on the Supreme Court, the hearing could very well result in the end of affirmative action in higher education.
Breaking news out of the Supreme Court. Let's bring in the one and only Pete Williams. Pete, what do we know?
Well, the Supreme Court's just agreed to take up another blockbuster issue. This is the question of affirmative action in college admissions. The court will hear a challenge to the affirmative action program at Harvard University that was brought by a group of Asian American students. Now, the Supreme Court has looked at this question repeatedly over the past years and has typically upheld affirmative action in college admissions as long as these are not strict quotas. The Supreme Court has said that colleges and universities can use a student's race as a plus factor in admissions, provided that it's not a quota. But there are two differences now since the Supreme Court has last upheld affirmative action, and their names are Anthony Kennedy and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, both of whom upheld affirmative action and are now gone, replaced by more conservative justices who take a more jaundiced view of this. So my guess is that this grant is too late to have the case argued this term. It seems likely that it'll be argued in the term that begins in October. But it is a huge issue, and affirmative action may be in serious trouble now that the court has agreed to look at this.
Now, from the moment the lawsuit against Harvard was first filed in 2018, much has been made of the fact that Asian American students, rather than exclusively whites, were plaintiffs in the suit, and progressives have naturally rushed to decry these students as dupes and racists. For instance, in The New Yorker a few years ago, one professor and a Harvard graduate said of the plaintiffs, quote, "Why would any of you sue Harvard for doing this, for not accepting you? They reject 95% of the people. To me, I was like, oh my God, these kids are really entitled." Just this week, a columnist for The Nation and another Harvard grad tweeted in regard to the Supreme Court announcement that Asians were eager to be seen as, quote, model minorities to whites. Now, as thrilling as it may be to invoke racial stereotypes in order to defend Harvard, a private university with an endowment of more than $53 billion, I would argue that the ongoing university affirmative action battles ultimately reveal less about Asian Americans or even race in the United States than they do about the peculiar nature of higher education and so-called opportunity in our age of grotesque economic inequality. To put it another way, fixating on the racial makeup of Ivy League universities and other selective colleges, regardless of one's perspective on what that makeup should be or how the schools in question should achieve it, is a project that, by definition, focuses on a handful of hyper-elite institutions to the exclusion of larger educational and economic crises. As the professor and critic Walter Ben Michaels has noted, comparatively few American college students attend institutions where admissions are competitive enough for affirmative action to be relevant. Or, as reporter Ben Castleman wrote in 538, according to data from the Department of Education, more than 3/4 of U.S. undergraduates attend colleges that accept at least half their applicants, just 4% attend schools that accept 25% or less, and hardly any, well under 1%, attend schools like Harvard and Yale that accept less than 10%. What's more is that the students that attend these highly selective schools tend to come from affluent, if not flat-out wealthy families. A few years ago, the New York Times ran a detailed breakdown of the median family income of the students that attend the top universities in the US and found that students at elite colleges were even richer than researchers had previously thought. According to the report, at 38 colleges in America, including 5 in the Ivy League, Dartmouth, Princeton, Yale, Penn, and Brown, more students came from the top 1% of the income scale than from the entire bottom 60%. The Times also found that about 4 in 10 students from the top 0.1% attend an Ivy League or elite university, which is roughly equivalent to the share of students from poor families who attend any 2- or 4-year college. So, in other words, the fight over so-called racial representation at Harvard is really a fight about how diverse one thinks the ruling class ought to be. That's, of course, a very exciting conversation for the media, whose members disproportionately come from elite universities themselves, but it's a concern that doesn't really seem to resonate with most of the American public. Despite the constant rhetoric that getting more underrepresented or historically marginalized groups into elite schools represents a critical battlefield in the fight for racial justice, the uneasy truth is that significant majorities of the public, including 62% of Black Americans, 65% of Hispanics, and 58% of Asians, say that race should not be a factor in college admissions decisions. In that same vein, in 2020, voters in Deep Blue, California, which of course is the most diverse state in the country, soundly defeated a statewide affirmative action measure by double digits.
Now to some of the major propositions statewide here in California. An effort to reinstate affirmative action has failed. That's Prop 16. It would have allowed affirmative action in government hiring decisions, and it's now trailing by more than 1 million votes, so it's going down. KCRA 3 political reporter Mike Lurie live at the state capitol to explain why. Mike.
Well, Brian, Prop 16 was very unpopular, as you mentioned, with many Californians. It would have set aside racial preferences for admission to the University of California, other public schools, and also for some state government contract work as well. So there was a lot of pushback to Prop 16, as you can imagine. That pushback came from a wide variety of ethnic groups. They told us they viewed it as a form of reverse discrimination. One of those arguing against it is Ward Connerly, who launched the original ban on affirmative action back in 1996. That was some 24 years ago. He told us today that Prop 16 would have given some people unfair preferential treatment.
Preferring one group of people over another on the basis of their skin color or their race. And many of us resent that. We don't want it. And yesterday, the voters of this state said we agree with.
And there was also some very strong opposition to Prop 16 from a wide variety of ethnic groups, including many Asian Americans. In fact, we covered them here at the state capitol many times in rallies. They said they were concerned about the perception that they are overrepresented at the University of California, and they said they were concerned that their children would not be admitted in, and that could harm their chances of going to the school of their choice.
This, by the way, is after advocates of Prop 16 ran this very persuasive ad comparing opponents of the ballot measure to Nazis.
Proposition 16 takes on discrimination. Some women make as little as 42% of what a man makes. Voting yes on Prop 16 helps us fix that. It's supported by leaders like Kamala Harris and opposed by those who have always opposed equality. We either fall from grace or we rise. Together, Proposition 16 provides equal opportunities, leveling the playing field for all of us.
Okay, so what's going on here? I suspect the American public's widespread lack of enthusiasm for race-based affirmative action in higher education is actually less about an abstract commitment to white supremacy and more about the simple fact that over 60% of Americans don't have a college degree themselves. To quote Walter Ben Michaels again, it's not surprising that, on the one hand, some relatively poor people have become skeptical of the idea that colleges become more egalitarian by seeking to admit more students of color, the idea that underlies the affirmative action theory of social justice, and it's even less surprising that rich people, including some college students themselves, remain committed to it. Now, the other issue is that even among Americans who are able to attend college, the cost of post-secondary education in the US has grown so astronomical that it's famously generated $1.7 trillion worth of student debt and has jeopardized the financial solvency of even middle-class households. Furthermore, the same economy that now demands a college degree barely even rewards it anymore. As we well know at this point, wages have been stagnant since the end of the 1970s for the majority of workers, including, yes, those with college degrees. So that's all to say that for the vast majority of Americans, there's simply bigger fish to fry than whether Harvard or Yale look like a United Colors of Benetton ad. And while we hear all the time from advocates of a diverse Ivy League that these elite institutions function as great pathways of upward mobility for the historically impoverished, keep in mind, again, their limited size. As reporter Ginia Belafonte once wrote, a great number of people in the pundit class believe that a more equitably balanced Harvard leads to a more equitably balanced America. But even if every spot in the Ivy League were filled by an exceptional student from a low-income family, a mere 60,000 or so American undergraduates would see their fortunes rise. Something like 6 million others would be left struggling in underfunded community colleges with typically poor rates of graduation. So, as the Supreme Court inches toward an eventual ruling on race based affirmative action, we'll no doubt continue to hear endless chatter from the media, from academics, and from the nonprofit sector about the tremendous stakes of the case for racial justice in America. But it should be obvious that this fight has nothing to do with the massive and still widening levels of inequality that continue to push the majority of Americans deeper into hardship. And unfortunately, we can only deal with that by taking on the very elites that universities like Harvard are in the business of making. If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.